open as well. If I can have the chat. Cool. Should be good. I don't ever set this up, but I love the idea of having like a controversial topic of some sort.
Hmm.
Is there anything that you're like really opinionated about recently? Could be the jump to PHP, Laravel, etc.
Yeah, that could be one thing I said, and like this was, I don't really do like too many hot takes
Yep.
where it's like, yeah, most of the time I try to see people's sides on one way or
Yep.
the other. But one of my most recent ones that I've said is my hot take is newer people to programming. Like if I was telling someone who is new to programming to start something fresh, I would tell them to start with a full stack framework. I would say, hey,
Okay.
start with learning Laravel. Even before you learn HTML and CSS, I would
Okay.
probably say the same
Interesting.
thing for like
Yeah.
Next.js too. Um,
Okay.
like that's my hot take.
That's
I don't know
interesting.
how controversial that is, but like I know so many people who like have been learning HTML and CSS for like years, and just they don't have the energy or excitement that they first had when they started.
Hmm.
And I think there's a benefit uh, to building something really
Yep.
fast, even if you don't know exactly how it works, kind of thing.
Yep. I definitely get the idea of like the seeing the outcome of the time that you're putting in
Mm,
from a building perspective. So I had never
yeah.
done anything web. I studied Java and
Okay.
C++ in college. Then I started at Microsoft, so I was doing like C# .NET stuff. I had never done any JavaScript until I took the Web Developer Bootcamp course by Colt Steele on Udemy, which is by far the best course I've ever taken.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing that stuck with me was like I was able to build and ship stuff faster than I ever had before. And that was the thing that I was like, okay, I want to be in the JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah.
Um, I would be interested, like the balance though of starting like brand new and the potential to get overwhelmed with something like Next.js. I could see like that would probably be my biggest counter argument is just there's so many things. But I would
Yeah.
also say to like invest that time in HTML, CSS, some basic JavaScript, and then quickly move into something that enables you to do more like a Next.js or like whatever the alternative is.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's definitely like that balance where I think it's like, hey, the first thing you should do is like, okay, here's a really deep, like a quick look in, okay, hey, here's how to, have something happen on the page that's not
Mhm.
just, hey, here's a red box kind of thing,
Yep.
and then kind
Mhm.
of breaking it down from there. I think that that's
Yep.
helpful.
Yep. Jason Torres, what's up, man? Said he's here for Laravel and I guess you too also. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate that. Yeah, talking about hot takes, it's like hard for me to have a hot take. My personality is just not naturally like to tell people they're wrong or to tell people that things suck or to say there's only one way to do stuff. It's not helpful for me content wise to not be more opinionated, but it's just hard because that's just not naturally my personality.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way where like I think like you kind of start to see this happen with uh people nowadays where it's like there there's so much like benefit to be able to have the skill, I guess would
Mhm.
be a good way of
Yeah.
trying to understand both sides without having to just jump to your own like
Mhm.
personal opinions kind of thing. And I'm the
Yep.
same way where it's like, okay, like I have my opinions of like, okay, here's why I switched from JavaScript ecosystem to Laravel. But I always say like if you are like building
Happy
things
with
and
like,
creating
yeah.
things, just keep going. I don't I don't care. Just
Yeah.
do it.
But today is meant to be your day to tell
It is.
everyone this is the way to go. We'll see. Talal on YouTube said Laravel has become my income generator for a few years now. That's, I mean, I get to your point. Like, if it works and you're building stuff and you're making money in this case, like that's the thing.
Oh yeah.
Experience has been great so far. Looking forward to what's coming. Love it. Josh says switch from JavaScript to, or just the title switch from JavaScript to Laravel. Let's fucking go.
There we go.
Ryan said I heard this would be better with JavaScript. I imagine this is going to be a fun one. So what we're going to do, everybody, is like we're going to introduce Josh. He'll talk a little bit about like background and where he is in his story, and then we're just going to dive in and do hands-on through the bootcamp.laravel.com, that's part of like core Laravel, I guess, like their core documentation?
Yep. So that would be what the Laravel team has kind of put together as, hey, here's a like
Mhm,
a written documentation for the three plus stacks to
mhm,
start with Laravel. And it kind of the way it walks through is very much a here's what Laravel has to offer in the sense of not just routing and pages and database structure and everything like that, but also things like towards the end of it, it gets into events and notifications and mailing and stuff
mhm,
like that.
yeah. Which I love that, and I think that's the thing that people go to all the time when I see people comment on Twitter and stuff is like, "Oh,
Mm,
JavaScript is, like, still trying to figure out how to do this? That's cute. We've been doing this, like, with a baked in thing for years," and it feels like it's just done all the things and has more of it there for you.
mm,
That's my understanding. That's what I'm looking forward to as well, and that's one of the things at times people love about React, Next.js, etcetera,
yeah.
is like you have the ability to go and do it however you want. And I think the same is true probably in this ecosystem with PHP and Laravel as well. But they give you like, hey, if you don't want to just come up with everything from scratch, here's the things that you can just run with.
Yep. Yep.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm much more of that person because I just
Mm,
want to build shit. I'm
yep.
not a super, super, super opinionated engineer where I have to build stuff myself. I just want to get stuff shipped.
Yep, exactly. Now, I definitely agree with you on that because I think like that's what I always say. Like I am in full support of like where Next.js I think is going, where Astro
Yep.
I think is going, because like
Yep.
the more you have all in one, and I think like
Hmm.
it's not at the same level as a Rails or Laravel just yet, just because it's not
Yep.
the same tenure. It's
Yep.
that's fine. But I think like the more you have opinions, the easier it is to get started, and so yeah, you might lose some community members along the way who would like
Yep.
that flexibility, but I think it's all good thing. But even
Yep.
things like, yeah, like I saw you were playing around with like ingest
Hmm.
yesterday or a couple days ago, and it's one of those things where, okay, you might not ever need queues in your and
Yep.
background jobs in your Laravel or just
But
in
they're
your web
there.
application in general. But if you're building in Laravel, you just have that, and it
Hmm.
doesn't change any kind of syntax or anything like that. You just add it to your application without having to
Yep.
even add a new package.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the stuff that you get to when you start building something semi legitimate. That it's like, yeah, we actually do need that. And one of so I'll say three things, and then we should start. One, Chris Ev is in the chat on YouTube. Who Chris is one of the people that I've seen talk about PHP and Laravel for years. Chris, if
Hmm.
you're interested in joining and hanging out with us, I can send you a link to do that.
Yeah.
Two, one thing that I actually am opinionated on is that there's very little innovation in the world. And
Mm.
so the
Okay.
references you reference like Astro and Next.js. And
Mm.
if you're like thinking you're excited about where they're going, if you look at where they're going, them and SvelteKit and like they're all kind of going the same place and they all have made similar changes in the same time span. And my other point with that is like if you look at cars, they all change from different makes and models the same way every 4 or 5 years. Like if you look at a
Mm.
96 Camry and a 96 Accord, they look the same. If you look at a 2005 Camry and Accord, they also look the same. And then if
Yep.
you look at a 2015 of those, like they still look the same, even though they look drastically different than they did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So this idea of like innovation is like you just see these things doing stuff together. And
Mm.
I think I had one more. Oh, the other thing that I think is complicating the JavaScript world right now, and I don't know if this is really a thing in Laravel, is the reason that ingest becomes more of a necessary thing is
Mm.
because of serverless for two
Yep.
reasons. Serverless, you can't just write code to do cron jobs, and you can't necessarily have long background tasks because you're limited to the runtime of those serverless functions. Because of that, it's way more complicated in the serverless ecosystem. And I go back and forth of like, if I were to build something, like I may just be better off having a full node server. The
Mm.
reason serverless is cool is because I can host it for free and not have to have like a full backend. And there's other benefits, obviously.
Yeah.
But like if I just did a node application, I could do a cron job and kick off a function very easily in code. So I think that's one of the things that like drastically complicates building more real world
Mhm.
things in the serverless JavaScript ecosystem.
Yep. And just have it long running too. Yeah. It's funny you say that
Mhm.
because like the very first video I put out that was basically saying, hey, here's why I am building in Laravel now. One of the reasons is because of Chris Sev, who's in the chat.
Yeah. Love
Because
it.
he put out this Notion document 2.5 years ago or so, where it was like,
Mm.
hey, here's the things that here's the reasons why I'm, I think it was VideoTap that was moving
Yeah.
from Next.js to Laravel. And so that was like
Yeah.
a big function. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll start playing around with Laravel again. But
Okay.
the app I was building was an AI app where I needed long running processes
Mhm.
longer than 40 seconds. And because I
Yep.
only knew serverless and hadn't yet built on like node servers yet, it was
Right.
mostly, I'd only built with serverless stuff. I was like, okay, I need a way to literally have jobs run for probably 15 minutes because
Mhm.
they were long enough where they needed to, grab a bunch of embeddings and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And that was really what pushed me over the edge. It was like, this
Yeah.
is very difficult to do
Yep.
unless you're doing, like you said, like a long running node.
Right. Yeah. And then there's like, I don't, there's a million things, and probably just diving in is good. Um, Chris, if you have a link to that Notion doc that Josh mentioned, share it. Also, Chris is in other meetings, so can't join us, but excited to see it. A couple other people said this should be fun. Lemmy said you're great at explaining things, so I'm sure several people that follow you on your channels are here too. Jason asked if we're going Blade. We are going to go with Livewire, but we'll talk about all that in a second. So, really quickly, do you want to introduce yourself and then just like a little bit about your background in like Laravel, and then we'll dive into hands-on. And then Jason Torres asked Chris Ev. Yes, Chris Ev, who's on YouTube. So we have people on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. You can't see each other comment wise, but I can see all the comments. So you may hear me refer to people's comments that are not on the platform that you're currently on, if that makes sense. But Josh, oh, also, how do you say your last name?
Last name is pronounced Siri, so just like the
Okay,
iPhone.
cool.
Yeah,
That's what
makes it a lot
I
easier.
guessed, but wanted to be sure. Cool. Yeah. So introduce yourself. Tell us about you.
Yeah, so long story short, I started web development probably around 7, 8 years ago, and I kind of came from. I never technically had a job as a engineer or a web developer. I was in the like support space for a long time. I did like support engineering. That's kind of how I
Hmm.
learned web development and learned hacking around with JavaScript, that kind of stuff, was because a lot of customers that I at the various jobs I had was like, okay, hey, I need to do X, Y, and Z with this app, but it doesn't have it out of the box. Well, let's write a quick JavaScript, snippet to help push this along kind of thing. And I eventually like kind of just started learning more and more JavaScript. I eventually started learning more and more, React and Vue, and Svelte was one of the things I really
All the things.
appreciated.
Yeah.
And then I just like on the side was like, okay, I want to build products. Like I want to actually build software solutions. And about 2.5 years ago, I started, experimenting with all the different flavors of full stack stuff. I did a lot of things in like Meteor, even though like Meteor kind of like slowly
Oh,
started going
yeah.
downhill,
I always
but I
thought
really
it
liked
seemed
what it had to
super
offer.
cool though. Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome. Like I still appreciate a lot of things that they did, and like so I was building this felt kit with like Supabase and like Firebase and Next.js with Supabase and Firebase, depending on like the different clients that I had on the side. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna try out Rails, Laravel, Django, and a little bit of like C# with Blazor. And Laravel kind of like stuck with like syntax wise, mostly because I could use Vue or Svelte with Laravel,
Mm.
and I didn't have to write any kind of like API endpoints or anything like that. And I kind of like put it in my head. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to go all in kind of thing. Not only will my next application I build do it be in Laravel, but every single one after that. And so I just about 2.5 years ago, I dove all in, and it's funny because I had never actually finished a product before building in Laravel. I kind of like had a couple ones that were, they hadn't made a little bit of money or stuff like that. But the first two SaaS applications I built were in Laravel, and one's
Okay.
still running to this day, which is awesome.
What are those, by the
Um,
way?
One is called Secure Quest. So it's basically security reviews for companies. I was working as a solutions engineer, sales engineer at the time, and we did a lot of like security reviews where companies who are looking to buy your software product always are like, "Hey, do you store information securely, or do
Mhm.
you, use all of the
Or do
normal
you not?
encryption?" Yeah, like all these kind of things that you had documented somewhere. And so I kind of built it out with Laravel,
Sweet.
which is fun. And then another one was just like a little Chrome extension, but I built the API in Laravel, so that was a fun way to kind of learn. Okay, hey, um, here's how to do like a little Chrome extension piece. But yeah, so it's long story short. After that was I got fired from my previous
Mm.
job and was like, hey, I'm going to dive all in on content creation because it's something that I loved, and I was uh, kind of had a couple videos I was doing for Laravel, and I uh, just started making videos about why I love the Laravel, why I think Laravel is a fantastic choice for people who are wanting to ship products or build products. And about 2 months ago, so in May, I got brought onto the Laravel team full time, and so I'm kind of living the
Oh,
dream
what?
life.
Really?
Yeah,
What are you doing with
yeah.
the Laravel team?
So
Like,
I'm doing DevRel and kind of like
oh,
support
sick.
engineering as well. So yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. And you were so before that, you were doing content full time?
I kind of yes and no. I was
Yeah.
doing it was kind of like interim. So I was working
Yeah.
on my products for a little bit and doing like some freelance. So I was basically freelancer. We'll call
Okay.
freelancer.
Yeah, but still. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a lot of
Um,
fun.
okay, I see on your Twitter now the reference to that. So just in case if you want to follow Josh on Twitter. Um Sweet. Swathard had a question on YouTube for Josh, wondering before Inertia, how would Laravel handle the bridge between back end and front end for the modern stuff? Has it always been smooth?
Yeah, before inertia. So for those who don't know, inertia is
Yeah.
basically think about like a glue. So usually if you have like a SPA and you're trying to talk to some kind of API backend, whether that's Node, Laravel, Rails, whatever, usually you have to write, okay, I need to authenticate. So I'm sending in, auth tokens or whatever that might be with my API request. And then I'm getting every information back. And then I'm doing something with that information. Inertia basically simplifies that altogether, and you don't have to write any of that endpoint stuff. Now inertia basically says, okay, I'm hitting this specific particular endpoint, whether I'm posting information or getting information. So I always like to say it's like the glue between your back end and your front end. You can use Vue, React, or Svelte with that. But there was really no, and Inertia and Livewire kind of came to be around the same time. Inertia was a little bit quicker. And Inertia was what kind of took off because the Vue community was really popular within Laravel,
Uh,
especially 10 years ago, and
mhm.
even more recently too. Um, and there wasn't really any story for that. It was more of like, hey, if you wanted to use Vue within Laravel, you probably just like embedded it onto your server rendered Laravel pages and then did that. So not sometimes you had to build steps, sometimes you didn't. There was Laravel mix, but otherwise, if you wanted a SPA, like full SPA
Mhm.
functionality, you just had it completely separate.
Okay. Cool. Sweet Goose, welcome to first stream in a while. Glad you guys make it. Let us share. I don't know why it's showing me these warnings. Oh, it's because I have a new account on StreamYard and I want to share this. And just behind the scenes, I ran the installer, which is Herd.
Perfect.
So, yeah, really quickly, what is Herd? What did I install on my machine?
Yeah. So I would say herd is the easiest way. So most people hate PHP mostly because it's just tough to get it running up on their local machine. So herd
Okay.
is basically for Mac OS and Windows currently an easy way to get PHP and Laravel up and running. So when you install
Okay.
herd, you're basically installing all the dependencies to run any PHP application, but also the Laravel installer so that um, creating a new project also allows you to have the local environment. So usually within, like a node project, you run npm run dev, and now you have your full local environment.
Mhm.
Herd basically gives you all of that to have these vanity URLs. So you can say my project.test, and now you have that whole
Oh, to
PHP.
run locally?
Yep, it's run locally.
So does that work? Like, does that give you an external, like what ngrok would do?
It not right out of the box, but
You
Laravel
can.
Herd does have that option to
Okay.
run like an ngrok, for example. Yep.
Cool. Sweet. So I'll put a link back in the chat just one more time. Also a few comments from Jason of heard is the word you heard. um, and this is the Livewire one, and I'm
Mhm.
going to, I think, just copy this composer command.
We, yep,
Or
we
do you
could do
want
that.
to?
There's
Okay.
a different way to do it just because we have installed Laravel Herd.
Okay.
And so if in our terminal, what you can just type is Laravel new.
Laravel new. And I'm wondering, I'm trying out Warp. Have you used Warp before as
I do
a
use Warp. I do use
Sweet.
Warp.
Okay. The only reason I don't is because I use the editor inside of VS, or the terminal inside of VS Code, and it doesn't directly integrate. So I'm
Okay.
forcing myself to at least do some things here.
Yeah.
We'll create
It
a new
looks like
Laravel project.
it
Let's
tried to
check.
run the AI version of it.
Oh, did it? Okay. If I run is not available in your. Okay. So I thought
Interesting. And is
I
Herd
say I
running right
installed
now?
it. Does it need to be running?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh,
So
so it's like
that's
it's
probably,
like an application.
yes, it is an application. Yep. So it
Yeah.
will.
Okay. So let me. What does that logo remind me? It reminds me of the Sanity logo. It's like the
It does
exact
look.
same color. The H, like I can't. Let me.
Yeah, that H
So
will
that
within
looks
there.
exactly. Hold on, we should pull this up because I'm pretty sure
That
they
does
did like a. See how
like a
their colors like fade?
little gradients.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
does
like
look really
exactly
similar.
the same to me at least. Whatever. Okay, so okay now I may have other work to do. So
Okay, and
let's
if you
get
click on like the H for Herd up in the yeah. So we might have
this
to.
started. This won't. I'm always scared that it's gonna like not copy out my or blur out my password or whatever.
And you can
Um,
just skip this for now. So that Herd,
yep,
Herd
okay,
does have like a version where it also will set up like MySQL and Redis for you, so you don't have
got
to
it.
worry about
Okay.
doing any of that.
What else did Coder Nerd? Laravel begins with third-party service right out of the box. Heard on Windows does not even support running MySQL without paying a. Oh, interesting. Chris F said two-tone colors, which he ought to be intimately familiar with because his wife Kat works at Sanity.io. So shout out to Sanity. Okay, so with that installed, now I should be able to run the Laravel new, or
Yep,
I
you
guess
might
let
have
me
to
start,
restart
which yeah, I was wondering about that.
you may have to restart your
Well,
terminal, but now it should have Laravel new.
if I could
Oh,
spell it. Which okay, so
there we go.
Laravel new. That is one
Right.
of the features, by the way. You kind of mentioned it for people. So Warp allows you to do like AI questions, and I think you used to have to like specifically tell it that that's what you're doing. Now, one of their features that they launched a few weeks ago is you just type into the thing like a English like a conversational question, and they can do AI stuff without like specifically you triggering like I want you to do AI on this. If that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yep.
Okay, so this is just project name. We'll call this Chirper.
Shepherd. Then we'll select the Laravel Breeze stack. So a couple
Breeze.
things here
Yeah.
is so the starter kits, um, and and just a quick note for like Herd is, there's a paid version of that, but there's other ways to get databases and stuff like that. But also Laravel does have stories for if you want to run Docker locally or even
Mm,
just Composer, which is basically npm version for PHP.
okay.
But these starter kits are Breeze is going to be your authentication, just strictly authentication to say, hey, here's users accounts already set up for you,
Yep.
as well as like a dashboard. And then Jetstream kind of takes that one step further, where you have things like Teams accounts set up, or
Okay.
like API tokens and two-factor authentication.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we're going
So
to
this
use.
is kind of basic auth with
Yep.
Breeze. Okay.
Yep.
Sweet.
I would say I start most, like 90% of my projects and even demos with Breeze.
Sweet. And then there's 4 Livewire options. There's just out of curiosity, there's Vault
Mhm.
class API and functional API. Is that going to be kind of the difference between class components in React and functional components in React?
Very similar, yeah, I would say. So like it is very similar, where functional feels and looks, I would say, a little bit more like JavaScript, in the
Yeah.
sense that they are very you're not writing everything in one class, where the class API is going to be strictly just everything in one class. The class API actually reminds me of like Svelte 5 now with runes. It's very, very
Oh,
similar,
which I
like
haven't
structure.
tried yet. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody's tried Svelte 5 with runes in the chat. Let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
I
I
haven't
haven't tried
even
it. I've only
looked at
seen
it.
some videos.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And then
So which
so
way? Yeah. Which way would you go here?
yeah, let's do the Volt functional API. I think that's going to be the best bet.
Functional.
I feel like it's going to seem very similar to maybe like at least in structure wise, it's going to feel very similar to like Next.js server actions, and so that's going to be the choice for us, I think. So it
What?
does also have the
Yeah.
option to have like React or Vue. Svelte
Cool.
does work with Inertia, but there's no starter kit out of the box.
Gotcha. So functional with Alpine. Isn't Alpine its
Yes.
own? That's its own like JavaScript library, right?
Yep. So Alpine is its own JavaScript library. And so the creator of Alpine JS, Caleb Porzio, is the creator of Livewire as well. And
Mhm.
so with Livewire 3, which is the latest version of Livewire, which is what we'll be using, it kind of entangles Alpine JS. And so a lot of like
Okay.
the magic that you get with Livewire kind of has Livewire or Alpine working under
Alpine.
the hood.
Gotcha. Cool. And then let's support dark mode. I say we do it.
Let's do it.
Probably won't do any testing here, but do you have a preference?
Pest is going to be the one that's more like the functional API.
Okay.
So that's
So
usually
yes,
my preference.
initialize Git repository. I doubt I'll publish it right now, but sure. Sweet, sweet, sweet. Goose said Alpine is pretty slick and simple. That's been one of the ones, like the Alpine, its whole thing is like it does good JavaScript stuff, but it's very minimal, right?
Mhm.
I've
Yeah,
heard
it's
good things.
very, yeah, and I think a lot of what, if you've ever played around with like Petite View,
Mhm.
I feel like it's very similar. So like Petite
Okay.
View, I think was kind of like given the same sense of like, okay, Vue might not be the best alternative to jQuery, but Petite View is. I think Alpine is kind of like that alternative to jQuery, modern alternative
Okay.
to jQuery.
Sweet.
Let's go ahead and do
Yeah.
SQLite. So the great thing is, then once we have SQLite, it kind of sets it up all for us, so we don't have to worry about managing our
Yep.
database and everything like that.
Cool.
We can say yes, we'll run those. So this is basically just saying, because we have users and tables and stuff like that, it will
It's gonna go ahead and
automatically.
apply those,
Yep,
like push those schemas
exactly.
to. Okay. And then go ahead and create the SQLite file as well.
Yep, let's do it.
Sweet. Chris said today I learned about Petit View. Nice. Coder Nerd said Windows has better options that are free and give you a full server setup out of the box. It's called Laragon.
Yep.
Nice. And then Brad Lee said that's why I use Sail when creating environments with Laravel. I'm not sure what
So
what point
Sail
they
would
were
be.
referring to, but
Yep. So Sail would be like the Docker version for Laravel, where instead of, if you're not wanting
okay.
to run all of it on your own server and you want to more containerize it,
Okay.
I'm not a Docker master, so I've never used Docker,
Yep.
but Sail is
Cool.
a great option for those who are smart enough.
Sweet. Stony on Twitch said, "Am I dreaming?" Referring to the fact that I'm actually trying out PHP Laravel, because he's one of the people that has been one of those voices of like, this would be so much easier, so much better. So
Stony has made their way into my Twitch and YouTube a
nice.
couple times too.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Good to see you
Good
here,
deal.
Stony.
Yeah.
You're everywhere.
Cool. So
Awesome.
that is good.
So now what we can do is we can go into that folder. We can run
And
CD
what are
chirper.
we? Or CD into chirper.
And then one thing I'd like to do
Ooh.
before even opening up our code editors, I like to run npm run dev. So the Laravel Breeze does come out of the box with Vite and like Tailwind, Alpine, and everything like that.
Okay.
And so it's just nice to get it going from the get go.
Cool.
But if we were to, in this folder, if we were to open up a new terminal tab, what we could do is type herd open, and then that will open up this project in our the first thing we need to do, actually, because we need to, I think that command is herd park. So if in your delete me or just in your code, actually, if you type herd park, that might be
So
the
still, should I
command.
stop the running npm run dev?
You don't have to,
Okay.
don't have to start that. So
herd park.
I believe that's what it is. Let me see.
Someone said, "Are we using herd?" Or Stoney said, "Are we using herd?" He said, "I guess we are." Mubashar said, "Herd link."
Herd link might be good too. Now try herd open. Just curious if that works. Okay, it's probably because I know, like, if we're like in nested directories, sometimes it depends. So if you were to go into your delete me directory,
The parent of this.
yeah, and then type herd park, I think that might work right there.
And then go back to Chirper.
Yeah, let's try that.
And then Mubashar says Park will include all the folders as linked sites. Link just links the current folder.
Oh, okay. So now we should be able to do herd open.
Herd open.
There we go.
There's something. Okay.
Perfect. So this is the starter. We haven't touched any code yet or anything like that, but we have a login page. We have a register page, all with Laravel, Alpine, and Livewire. So if we wanted to make a new user, we could do that right now and be directed into our dashboard. So one of the things I always like to say is, like, this itself, like Laravel Breeze with this whole setup, is one of the reasons why I started building projects with Laravel, because creating something like this with any stack, even when you're familiar with, still takes a little bit of time, unless you have like a starter kit out of the box. But because this is a first party starter kit from the Laravel team, like, everything's maintained and tightly connected.
By the way, would I be able to access this if I wasn't running the npm run dev?
You would be able to access this. You wouldn't have any hot reloading if you changed any styles.
Okay. Gotcha.
So npm run dev gives you style reloading, where the herd, like the chirper.test function, still gives you all of like the PHP backend and actual functionality, but the live reloading wouldn't happen.
Okay. I'll have to tease apart those pieces, I think, eventually. Someone said Taylor Otwell is live on another channel, on the Century YouTube channel. I'm not sure who is that. A Laravel person?
So Taylor Otwell is the creator of Laravel, creator and CEO.
Nice. I love being oblivious to stuff and then saying things that people I should. Well, I don't know if I should definitely know them because I have never used Laravel.
Yeah, you don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. Century is also a partner of mine, so it's cool to see them on the Century channel as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wonder, is he on Syntax?
I don't know. Well, maybe they said Century YouTube channel. I don't know. Does Syntax does have its own separate YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, that is true.
Josh is laughing at is that another Laravel person? I'm dead. Is the Taylor Swift framework. Fair enough. Diamond Boy on Twitch, misspelled favorite, by the way. Said if it isn't my other favorite, Josh.
Hey, favorite Josh. Good to see you.
So my password for this, by the way, is Laravel, in case anyone is interested. So I can go ahead and register. Laravel 1, 2, 3. 3, register. Sweet. So I'm logged in. Dashboard. So this goes back to home page, I would imagine. Or
So
does it?
yep, that goes back to dashboard, and then in the drop down in the right. So this is stuff that we get out of the box is
Yep.
profile. So we
Update
can update
password.
password
Cool.
as well as delete account. One cool thing we kind of saw it with like the validation, but so that would be server side validation that we have out of the
Mhm.
box for things like passwords and email, anything like that. But additionally, with those login and registration pages, there's also the functionality of like a forgot password email
Mhm.
flow kind of thing.
Yep.
So again, stuff that you need for pretty much every app, but most of the time you don't really want to code
Yeah.
it by hand.
And most of the time it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, so that validation is happening server side. Is that do you is it common to mix in client side validation as well?
Yep, I would say so for sure. So, you can have both. I think, like for example, if you wanted just the standard HTML validation is probably more
Mhm.
standard within what folks who do Laravel and Livewire, for example, just because now you have that HTML validation of like, okay, this field is required, for example, or this is a
Mhm.
password field. But then the server side validation is going to be if you need a certain number of strings, or
Mhm.
if you want to do any like regex expression, that's
Yep.
all kind of built into Laravel's validation helper in the
Cool.
back end.
So there's like in the JavaScript ecosystem, Zod has become super, super popular.
Mhm.
They have a kind of a built-in helper for validation around form data specifically, or just data in general.
Yep. So just data in general, but mostly most of the
Most of it is for
validation is going
forms.
to be very similar to Zod in the sense that
Yep.
like you can say, okay, this should be a string and it should be 5 characters and a
Mhm.
minimum of 5 characters, or this is required in a string, minimum of 5 characters, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So the syntax is going to be very similar. I always like to say a lot of Laravel's syntax is very readable in the sense that even if you haven't written any PHP, it's
You
still
could get it. Yeah.
yeah, you can understand, okay, here's what's happening. But it is, I would say it's very similar to Zod in the sense that you have each one of those. So Zod gives you like, hey, this should be, it has the recursive iteration of like, hey, here's a string, 5 characters, that kind of thing. And that's the
Mhm.
same way with Laravel's validation.
Cool. Sony said you must have backend validation because every user is evil. Client validation saves you requests to process. Absolutely. That's never. It's funny that like it's happened a few times where I've asked about like what would you do for client side validation, and people are like you have to have server validation. I'm like, yes, you do. You can additionally have client side
Yep.
validation,
Yep.
but that is always a good thing to clarify for people, especially if they think that client side validation is security, which it's not. It's
Mhm.
just user experience at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious, do you
Um,
think that
yeah, go ahead.
would you classify like a type of password on an input? Would that be client side validation, or is that just more UX?
Just with like the type.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's security from the perspective of it's like blacked out, or like you can't see the actual letters for people that are potentially standing behind you as you type in password. So in that
Mhm.
sense, but yeah, that's just I don't know. That's user experience because you can get things like autocomplete with password managers and that sort of
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
But the actual security of any of that stuff to all these points has to happen through validation on the back end.
Mhm. I like it.
Someone was saying they were going to clip the stream where I was like, "Who's that person who is the founder of Laravel?" And Coder Nerd said, "Luckily, Laravel people are not so toxic as the JavaScript community." I'd be interested to learn more about that at some point. We'll see.
Yeah, I would say we more just like know that hey, everyone's trying to do their best to build
Mhm.
products, so we can
Yep.
all be as friendly as possible.
Yep.
It would have been bad if I said if I like stumbled over who Taylor was because
It'd
now he's my
be a
boss. So
little
it's
different. Oh well, that especially for you. Yeah, that's funny. All right, so We have auth built in. We have dashboard, which is probably just going to say something like we're logged in. I was expecting. This link does go back to the dashboard. That's interesting. So this is specifically like a dashboard nav.
Yeah,
Anyway,
specifically.
yeah. What's next step?
Yeah, I would say the next step. Why don't we jump into the code now? Let's do
Okay.
that.
So let's open.
And for those following along,
the
we'll follow along like loosely, I think, with the boot camp, but yeah, it's like that whole boot camp is fantastic to look through.
Sweet. Cool.
Okay, so probably good to have. We can probably do it all without having any kind of extensions in VS Code, but it's probably helpful to have some, just so we have.
I would imagine. Yeah.
The one that's helpful, there's two that I always like to say, and the Laravel team itself is actually working on changing this to have more of official plugins for VS Code, which we don't have right now. Because most people kind of use maybe like PHP Storm, or Taylor uses Sublime Text, for example.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. But if you search Tall Stack, so that's the stack that we're kind of using: Tailwind, Alpine, Laravel.
Oh, okay.
That package is kind of like a collection
Yeah.
of 4 or 5 different extensions. That's perfect to use.
Sweet. Your average gamer says Laravel is nice, reminds me of Rails. I imagine there's lots of similarities, and especially the things that I liked about Rails, I imagine there's similarities in just terms of has a bunch of stuff built in for you, and scaffolding with code and stuff like that. So I'm excited about that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't say I needed to restart, so it should be okay.
Yeah, I think it should be okay for that one. And then one more that we'll do specifically for PHP. It's called PHP Intella. And then it's actually IN. It's that third one with the elephant. PHP Intella.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So this is what basically just gives us a lot of kind of like workspace integration, as well as like code completion, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For PHP specifically.
Cool. Got it. Michael on YouTube, what's up? Sweet.
Awesome. Why don't we, so we'll do one of the command line scaffolds first, but before we even do that, why don't we go to the dashboard page, and I want to just show one of the things I kind of like to show, especially for people who come from the JavaScript ecosystem, is okay, yes, you do have a lot of like packages where you can say, hey, here's everything out of the box that this might give, where you have, maybe you're using Nextauth and you're using Prisma, and you could have all of this up within, one line of code, like the T3 stack, for example. But one of the things I like to show is how it's so tightly knit, which also is like a good benefit. So if we go into, so this route, so everything is not file based. Everything is, I don't know, it's not file based. It's written in a file for your routes. So it's not folder file based routing.
Okay.
But it is code based routing. So in that web.php for our routes is what will show you, hey, for when we try to access the dashboard, we're showing the dashboard view, and we have these middlewares authenticated for the dashboard. So you can only see this dashboard with that authentication and verified middleware.
So we have the context of middleware. They have a context additionally of being verified. So I assume that means like your email is verified.
Yep. And that's only if you can turn on email verification. We don't have it out of the box turned on for us, but we can turn it on with one line of code, basically, if we want to.
Cool. So this is where all of our routing goes. Like as we add a new page in the future, we'll have a view defined somewhere, and then we'll define the route in here to go to what are the two different, like syntactically, what are the two different profiles? Oh, one is the route, and then one is the name of the view.
Yep, you've got it. Exactly. So the first one would be what the route parameter, the route URI is. And then the second one, if you go into resources, and then views,
Okay.
that would be correspondent to that blade.php file. So that route view helper is saying, okay, I'm looking for a view with this file name in this folder.
Cool. And then Blade is templating language or like templating, how
Exactly.
you
So,
do templating, right?
yep. So Blade is
Okay.
templating language. Blade would be similar to maybe like, you know, Astro. If you're coming from like Rails, it would be HTML.erb.
ERB.
Blade is the is very similar in the sense that it does allow you to write PHP and a bunch of different helpers
Yep.
and directives. So you have things like for loops and Blade, or you have like, for else loops. But you also can write just straight PHP as well.
Yep.
Um,
So if I think about this from like just the node ecosystem of not frameworks, something like EJS or handlebars or Pug or
mhm.
whatever those became.
Yep. Yep.
Sweet.
Where I think most of those you have the ability to write JavaScript like inline, right?
Hmm.
Or do you have to
Yep.
like set a script tag? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they have different syntaxes for doing iterate like for loops and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So the syntax for Blade is probably what we'll be using most because Livewire basically uses Blade on the front end. Livewire is basically the back end connection to your Blade syntax. So we're still going to be
Mm.
using Blade for today. But anything that is kind of like echoed out, or in terms of like in Svelte, you'll have single curly brackets. In
Hmm.
React, you have JSX, and in Vue, you have Livewire is going to seem a little more similar to probably Vue and Svelte than React, at least on the front end. But you see that you're logged in kind of section right there.
Hmm. Yeah.
What we can do is just to kind of show, if you do double curly, if you kind of remove everything in those curly brackets, what we can do is if you just type auth and then that what Copilot's doing right there,
Autocomplete.
auth
Okay.
username. So this kind of shows you what that connection between Laravel's authentication, because we're
Hmm.
server rendering the page, we know who is authenticated, and we have their user and we have their name.
Okay. So all of what we're doing right now is server rendered by default.
Mhm.
Um, Michael said, "I remember Livewire." Chris said, "Good Copilot." Good dog. So is this the traditional syntax for like accessing properties of a class or object or whatever? Is the arrow instead of the dot?
Yep, arrow instead of a dot. I
Okay.
think that's what that combined with dollar signs throws
Hmm.
most people off within
Yep.
JavaScript, just because arrows is completely different within JavaScript. But yes, so
Yep.
dollar or arrow would be like dot notation.
Right. Okay. Cool. Now, is there, as I like hunt over while this is lifting, so do I get IntelliSense in here? Like, where does IntelliSense come from on here to show me like what I have access to?
We should have sometimes in PHP IntelliFence does, or the Blade one that we installed sometimes has that out, and maybe because it didn't restart, but most of the time you will be able to have what is associated with that model.
Hmm.
In this case, we do know that this is and maybe it doesn't give out IntelliSense in this because we can use a different syntax, so we can do a capital A for auth. Um, and then this is kind of some different PHP syntax. So if we do a capital A for auth, and then yes, that colon user.
Oh, this is funny. The trigger for my emoji shortcut, it's an app called Rocket. You can see it
Okay,
just
yeah,
pop
yeah.
up in the top left. The trigger for that is colon colon.
Oh,
So if I get into doing colon colon a lot, I'm going to be in trouble.
good thing we don't have to do too many colons. We can have
Yeah.
helpers. So, um, okay, there we
So
go.
that
So
one
now we have that
has okay.
IntelliSense.
Interesting. Do you know, is there something that should be configured or whatever to get IntelliSense here, or should I restart VS Code?
I don't know that off the gate. So this is one thing that it's a good point, is that the Laravel team is trying to better itself for VS Code, because a lot of people like yourself are like,
Hmm.
okay, what's the deal with Laravel? And there just really hasn't been that many good VS Code plugins. So I
Okay.
think it's because those PHP helpers, that auth is basically saying, I have access to this, so I don't have to call the capital auth anywhere. So it's more of like a
Hmm.
magical syntax, a little sugar. It basically does the same thing, but I wonder if it doesn't use IntelliSense with that. Let me pull up in my VS Code just to see.
Okay. Stony was saying I use Laravel IDE helper to get extra syntax. He said it's a package. You should know it.
Laravel IDE, yep, that is helpful to have as well. So the IDE helper does give you extra syntax within Blade and PHP as well.
Is that something I should look at installing?
I believe the IDE helper is actually like it's not necessarily, maybe that is it, because I think there's also like a composer package as well.
This is a good point too. Your average gamer says the colon is for constants. So from the auth constant, you can access its. Or I assume you mean constant like the class definition and not an instance of the class, probably.
Yep. So constant would be like the class definition of auth, and even which is, it's globally available within anywhere you write, so you don't have to import that class definition, and then that auth, the functional syntax of it that we're doing right here is more of like that little helper.
I installed a plugin that, God, I can't type, that Stony mentioned. It didn't. I didn't see what I expected in terms of IntelliSense here. But that's
Yeah.
another thing is like the auth stuff. Like I'm accessing this. I'm not doing an import or anything. That's just available to me through the initial setup.
Yep. So both with the the class constant syntax, as well as like this magic helper syntax is what I would call it. I know there's an official name for it. I'm blanking on it right now, but that particular syntax is then globally available anywhere in your Laravel application.
Sweet.
So we can do that with, most of the time you're probably going to do it with auth, and but Blade also has some helper directives as well. So for example, the Blade syntax is going to be an at sign. So we would do something like an at if, or an at, we can even do at auth, for example. That would be actually outside of this double curly brackets.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah. Because we're like executing code inside of the brackets versus the actual syntax would be here.
Yep.
This is nice that there's IntelliSense for that. I haven't done like a traditional templating thing in a long time, but I remember that being one of the things with EJS early on, is having to manually type those if and else and blah blah blah, and that really sucking.
Yep, it does. Sweet. Let's get into actually like building out it.
Okay.
So if we jump into the terminal, we're going to write PHP artisan. So ARTISAN.
Okay.
So this is basically the helper syntax for if we're running any kind of commands within Laravel. PHP artisan is kind of like that prefix for us. A lot of people use like any kind of like macro for it. Some people say
like PA or something.
Yeah, exactly. I actually type it out all the time. I'm not, maybe just because I'm too lazy to actually write the.
Think about how many days of your life you've lost.
I know. And then we're going to do make : model.
Make model. Okay. And by the way, for audience, let me know. I think screen size, I think, is good. Let me know if it feels good font size wise for everybody watching. Cool. So make model.
Awesome. And then what we can do is we can pass it what we want to call this model. And usually when we're creating a model, we create it with the singular syntax. So we're going to call this a chirp. So capital C for chirp.
Cool.
And then now we can pass specific flags. So we're making this model, but we can also say we want to make a migration and a controller. So we can push -MC.
-MC. Okay. Stony said this is where you get into the magic commands that do a lot for you. That's the thing that is most interesting for me, I think.
Really? Okay. Yep.
So Michael said, I have an undeserved fear of PHP, to be honest. Undeserved because I know nothing about it. Fair enough. That's why I'm doing this. I've never done it before. So also getting some comments about installing Intella PHP and PHP Profiler too. Are those VS Code extensions? Have you heard of those?
Install PHP. So we have nope, we don't have those installed. So we have PHP IntelliFence installed, and then some Laravel IntelliSense plugins with
Oh, this is an AI one. Interesting.
I haven't actually tried that one yet.
AI powered extension, enhanced productivity. I don't know. Will that compete then with Copilot if that's like AI stuff? I may leave that for now.
Yeah, that might. I have not used that myself. Okay.
Josh said all you need to know about PHP is it makes you money. Hence why the variable definition starts with $. Fair. And Terry on Twitter, what's going on? Okay, cool. So are we ready to run this command?
Yes, let's run it. Let's run it.
So we're creating a model called chirp. And then we're telling it MC is going to tell it to go ahead and do the migration for us.
It's going to create a migration for us. And now we can add those specific tables to the migration. And then it's going to create a controller as well. We're going to follow along with the Laravel bootcamp for the controller. There's a lot of people, especially within modern Livewire now, don't really write that many controllers. I don't myself either, but I want to make sure we kind of stick with this. But I'll kind of show how you could do all this without controllers as well.
Okay. Sick.
So now let's open up that create chirps table migration.
Chirps table migration. So each migration is going to be a class, and then inside of the up, this is the thing that you want to apply to the database. In this case, we have a blueprint of a table. Okay, I'm a little confused at what I'm looking at.
Yep. So this is the kind of blank scaffold that stub we should say is like that creates for every migration. So anytime we run a create migration or make migration command or a -m for a model or anything else is going to create this stub. And so basically anything in this schema create function parameter here is going to say, I want to create a new table. It's going to be called chirp. So it automatically
it takes the single model name and applies it to a pluralized lowercase table name. Got it.
Same thing with like the file name here, which is just used for migration history. So now this is the latest migration create chirps table.
Okay.
And so now in here, so if you're used to like any kind of like Drizzle or Prisma, this is where we would create those actual, here's what the table should look like. So I usually like to do this after the ID. It doesn't really matter where these sections can be pushed. But the first thing we're going to do is and this is mostly just like, okay, here's all the tables from left to right or first to last.
Like column headers left to right.
Yep. And what GitHub Copilot is saying is perfect for us. So basically, the first thing we're going to do is link these chirps to a user.
Sweet. So really quickly too, before I address that, these are functions that translate to generating or to telling it I'm creating an ID, and I'm assuming that just does an ID with the name of ID, like the name is actual ID by default, or maybe it's underscore ID.
Yep. By default.
Okay. And then timestamps, I'm assuming this is automatically going to generate like created at, updated at.
Yep. You've got it. Exactly.
Cool. And then in this case, and this is the thing I think that is really cool, also slightly intimidating, is like having to learn all of this. These are very powerful, I can already tell. And I'll tell why in a second. But it is a whole new set of things that we have to learn, like nomenclature. But we have foreign ID, so we're going to have a reference to another table. And the property here is going to be called user ID. There's got to be some sort of built in here that it knows this is relating to the user table. How does it know that's relating to the user table?
So it knows it's related to the user table by the syntax of the user underscore ID. So the first part of it is saying, okay,
is the table name basically
named user. Yep.
Okay. So if for example, we had a book. Each book had a bunch of multiple authors or vice versa or whatever.
Mhm.
Inside of there, if we just said book underscore ID with it being a foreign ID, it would look for a table of book and then grab the unique ID of that table to be the associator. So all the things that
Yep.
you do all the time that typically you have to do more work to set up, they're saying like based on this naming convention, we're going to go ahead and do that for you. We have constrained and on delete cascade. So on delete cascade means if we delete the probably if we delete the user, it's going to delete all the chirps.
Yep.
And I assume constrained is attached to that as well. What is constrained exactly?
Constrained is, let me pull it up just so I'm saying it. Because I believe what it means, it's a shorthand syntax for
Actually, does it tell me? All right, create a foreign key constraint on this column referencing the ID column of the conventionally related table. Foreign key constraint on this column referencing. Okay.
Yeah, so
foreign key constraints, I think, are associated with the idea of cascades because we have now defined like this rule of is generally a rule you apply to a table database foreign key constraint. So by having foreign key constraints, we're able to have the cascade rule
yep.
to have those two things associated and do the cascading delete.
Yep. So the constraint is basically just the shorthand syntax for making sure that foreign key is set up properly, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because the foreign ID helper is like you mentioned is for if we're grabbing the syntax, but if we wanted to call it something else, if we wanted to call this like author ID or something like that, but we didn't have an author table, we could use the table foreign command, and that would basically just say that we can say, okay, I want to create a user ID that references
that
or author ID
specific,
that references the user. Yeah. So there's other ways to do it, and this is more just like the magical magical syntax of it.
A couple people are saying means you cannot have a value that does not exist on the other table. Think that it's just a shorthand for references on, so make sure it exists. So you're making sure you have an actual item based on that ID in the other table, and then the on delete cascade defines the relationship of what to do when you delete a user, in this case, to cascade delete the chirps.
Yep.
One thing I was curious about that I don't get, and this is maybe not fair because I think probably PHP WebStorm is the way people would go. Getting IntelliSense inside of here, like in the quotes, to then see like what are all the different on delete options that I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if I'm curious if PHP IntelliSense gives you, if we were to remove the on delete, if it gives you the options there. So
like if I type on delete.
Yeah. Because on.
Okay. So it gives me here.
Okay. So it
it's
does
triggering that. And then it says a string that's called. So it just takes a parameter of a string. It doesn't look like it has like an enum or anything.
No.
So I don't think I'm going to get IntelliSense based on that.
Yeah.
Thoughts on
that? And there is the. And most people, I think you do have better IntelliSense in PHP Storm for that. But it is interesting to me, especially coming from the JavaScript world, of like how like PHP developers don't really care for IntelliSense as much, which is really interesting.
That's that's the first thing I notice when I'm playing with stuff, because it's so self-documenting too. That's a big thing for me. Josh asked about thoughts on not using constraints and foreign keys. I read an article on Planet Scale about it and some stuff from Rails people about it too. I don't know that at a deep enough level. I actually worked at Planet Scale for what it's worth. It's been a couple years. Planet Scale didn't support foreign keys because they made a decision that it made a lot of the things that they did underneath the hood to get the features and things of PlanetScale on top of MySQL. They made that as an intentional decision and sacrifice to that they had trade-offs that were better, that were more beneficial for the product they were trying to build. So I don't know, like at a super technical deep level, what that trade-off was, but it enabled them to do features that they thought were um, core to the product. There's also, if you get into like the cascading part too, that's one of the things you couldn't do with, or you had to do an extra configuration in Prisma if you use PlanetScale
Hmm.
to tell Prisma to handle the cascade instead of the database handle the cascade, because PlanetScale didn't have the foreign key constraints, which is something that maybe Mubashar is saying. I prefer not to have constraints in schema, set them up on the models if I want them. So like
Yeah.
inside of your code, you could handle exactly how you want that to work.
Yeah. And Laravel, to that point from Bosch, Laravel does have the ability to say in your model itself, you can actually say, okay, when this model is either booted, so when a new model is created, or when it's deleted, you can run specific code for that. And a lot of people choose to do that too. Like for example, some people choose to have specific parameters or IDs in it, and
Sure.
it kind of like leads to even just like all the people in the chat who have like different opinions. One of the things I like to say about Laravel is it's very opinionated in terms of like, hey, structure. Hey, here's what most code should look like. Here's migrations work. Here's how all that. But you still have all those like preferences and opinions of
Yep.
like how you want to do things in it. There's no necessarily best practices a lot of times, but you still can jump into any other Laravel project and be like, okay, I know
What's
how
going
all
on?
this is working.
Yep. Michael said one day I think there'll be unified schemas between front and back end, all built on Zod, including database. Because right now, like I use Zod a
Mm,
lot. I can use it front and back end with JavaScript, but I also still have my Prisma schema. So I'm balancing like all these different
mhm.
models and then schemas. So there are several things going
Yeah,
on.
that is
I
one thing.
did. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that's one thing I'm interested in seeing. There's a couple great people on the Laravel team who are working on that VS Code stuff.
Mm,
One of the things I'm really interested in seeing how it progresses is that like I think Zod and TRPC and stuff like that have brought so much to the JavaScript community in the
hmm
sense of, okay, I have all of my stuff on my server. I also want to see that
hmm
IntelliSense on the client.
Yep.
And um, you know, I don't think there's a good story even within like PHP Storm for how that works, just because of how everything is built in the sense, unless you have specific database parameters for that.
hmm It's also funny. I said PHP WebStorm earlier, so it's PHP Storm and it's WebStorm.
Yeah.
WebStorm is one that a lot of people I've seen do videos on, like moving from VS Code to WebStorm, and then PHP Storm is one specifically to PHP.
Yeah.
Cool.
I do not
Okay.
use PHP Storm. I've kind of just stuck with VS Code.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
I'm in here with you.
Sweet.
Sweet. Let's
Yeah.
also add another column. We'll say table, and we'll call this the after the arrow. We'll say it's going to be a string. And why don't we call this a message?
Cool.
And then PHP does have to have the semicolon.
I call it. Yeah.
It's not optional in PHP. Awesome. And now what we can do is in our
Cool.
terminal, we can run PHP artisan and then migrate.
Something. Okay. Yeah. So does it keep track of somewhere internally? It knows which schemas have been applied or not, or which migrations have been applied or not.
I
Because this is only going to apply like the most recent migration.
Yep,
But if
that's
I were to
correct.
have run another migration to create another table before running this command, it would
Mhm.
know to apply both of
Both of them.
these. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And I think the way it runs, I would have to look at the code for how it does it. But I think the way it runs is it checks if that table is actually created. Um,
Okay.
um,
Ricardo's saying there's a table with that information on the schema, which makes sense.
Because, for example, if you were to now edit this migration file and try to
Mm-hmm.
run migration, PHP
Mm-hmm.
artist migration, it's not going to change it. You would have to roll back the migration and then recreate it.
Okay. But I could
Yep.
create a new migration to do that.
Yep.
Okay.
You could create a new migration that adds tables to this column.
Cool. Sweet.
Awesome.
Okay.
Now let's go into the chirp model. So this is kind of like where it's interesting because I don't think there's that much of a sense of what a good comparison to models are in like JavaScript, in the sense that, after you've kind of created your schema, I guess that would be like a Zod schema
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, would be like a model.
Yep.
We're here, we can define specific relationships so that we have that those parameters within our code, but then we also can define how this model should work.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and in the chirp, let's go ahead and in the chirp model, the first thing that we have to do is say protected. So we'll create a new, or start typing a new, and we can do this
Like
probably like after use has
is this a new
factory.
class or inside of
Actually,
here?
it'll be inside of that class. Yep.
Okay.
So protected fillable, that $sign fillable, and this is basically just saying we can type in message here. So this is basically just saying we allow users to actually create a chirp with the parameters of message.
Okay. So these are properties we allow the user to submit to then go to the database. So the
Yep.
ID is going to be auto-generated, which is why it's not listed here. The created at, updated at, those are auto-generated.
Yep.
The user association is auto-generated. The only thing that we're accepting inputs for is is message.
Yep. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So if we did not have that, then we would get an error in saying that this, it can't be created because there's not mass assignment.
Okay.
Awesome. And then we can go into the user model and do the same thing for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, and we can do this. So the user already has protected fillable, but what we'll do is we'll add a new function actually in this user's class. And so we can do that. We can do that at the end of the file or in the middle, wherever you feel most comfortable.
Okay. Yeah. So what would that be?
That would be a public function. So if we say public function, this is kind of just a helper function to help us out. We can say chirps. And then it's going to be a function. So with those brackets, and then we can say a colon. And this is what type safety is within PHP, within Laravel, within PHP specifically. But we can say has many.
Copilot's killing it.
And yep. And then all of this is good to go.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we'll have to import that. So if you kind of hover over it, or if you I don't know if quick fix, usually I like backspace on Y and like press Y and enter again, if that makes sense. Yeah, there we go.
For auto import. Cool.
Now auto import that class. So basically this is what types and type safety looks like within PHP. Is this function is expecting the type of has many to be returned. And if for some reason that didn't return, if we were to say return false, for example, then it would show in our code as an error.
And I guess this would be typed to specifically return objects that are chirps.
Yep, typed to specifically return multiple objects.
Right.
So multiple instances of model. So has many isn't necessarily related to the chirps itself. But in that return statement, we can say the user, when we call user arrow bracket chirps, we are getting all the chirps associated with that user. So now it's just this helper function that we're creating. So in our code, we don't have to write this SQL query that says, give me all the chirps where user ID equals auth user ID. We can just say auth user chirps, and we have all of them ready for us.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that in my head, like in comparison to using an ORM or something.
Hmm.
One other thing that's really interesting, and this doesn't get talked about enough, is the idea of the obfuscated or like hidden
Mm.
properties. Like the fact that these things, by defining this hidden property and naming password and remember token, that means these are not going to be passed to the front end. So when we
Yep.
access user information on the front end, it's not going to come here, which
Yep.
is that's pretty nice.
Yep. And that's is incredibly helpful for when you're using like Inertia. It's not as necessary for when we're using Livewire because it's all server side rendered. And so if we don't
Mm,
actually call auth user password, we would never get that.
yep.
In Inertia, if you want specific things to never be shown, let's say like a Stripe ID or whatever that might be,
Hmm.
um,
Yep.
you're if you're passing in the user, it's very similar to a view in the sense that we're passing in the user to that view, whether that's a React or view. Um, uh,
Nice.
all of those parameters are still given
Yep.
to the user, and so now you would have to make sure that you serialize them.
Okay. Cool. Nikki T on Twitch, what's up? Josh says
Nikki T.
Eloquent is the best ORM out there. I've never used. I don't even know if I've heard of Eloquent. Interesting. Is that a Laravel one?
Yep. So
Oh, okay.
Eloquent is like Laravel's ORM.
Cool. Is
Yep.
that built into Laravel?
Yep.
Is that part of? Is that associated with any of this or no?
Not yet. So we technically haven't
Okay.
written an Eloquent query yet.
Okay. Cool.
And now let's go ahead and we can go into our routes, our web routes.
Whoa. And then we.
Perfect. Let's create a new route called route. And then we're going to say get instead of view. So we're going to actually pass this to a controller. So that way we have that piece kind of set up. So we'll say get, and then we can still pass it to chirps. And then the second is going to be an array. So instead of a string, will be an array, and we'll call chirp controller. So that one right there. And if you kind of like backspace on
Yeah.
R and PHP, there we go. And then for middleware, we'll keep that auth middleware, and we
Mhm.
can call it the name. And so this is going to be the named parameter for this route. So in our code, we can say I want to like redirect to chirps.
Mhm.
So we can call this chirps.
What's the? So is that saying I want to navigate like you would use it? I want to navigate to the page
Mhm.
where we've named it chirps, but I could also navigate to slash chirps based
That's
on
correct.
this. So
Yep.
if
Yep. So
so this would be route. So this would be like I could either say navigate to the page with the name of chirps, or I could go to slash chirps route.
yep.
Like I won't
Exactly.
do that, but just differentiating between those two properties.
Yep, exactly. The name parameter so that you have that if for whatever reason maybe the function change, or a lot of times you will see the name parameters if you're saying, okay, I want to get the chirp with the ID of whatever.
Hmm.
Um, what Laravel does is called something called route model binding. So we could say I want the chirps dot show route, and I'm passing in this
Oh, a chirp, and it
ID. It'll
it it
automatically
okay.
link it for us. Yep.
Interesting. So not something that's very popular, I don't think, is like types around routes.
Hmm.
Okay, that's cool.
And Laravel also it's not directly tied to Laravel, but there's this it might actually be tied to Laravel, but there's this package called Ziggy if you're
Mhm.
using Inertia, where it basically it's built by the Titan team who is Laravel in the Laravel community. But basically, it allows you to have those type safety routes in your JavaScript file. So if you want to be like, okay, I
Okay.
want to post to this route, or I want to, direct to this route. Um, Sweet. Let's go ahead and now let's go into our controller and let's actually create this index class.
So the inside there is already a controller.
So that was, yep, that was what when we passed in the dash MC
It
for
was
that
M for
model.
migrate, C for controller.
Yep,
Got it.
exactly.
Cool.
You got it.
Um Cool. Let's save that. And then index is the name of the function in there that we want to call.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So this route get chirps, we can say that we want to direct it to whatever function is in this chirp controller that's called index.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, why are we doing that specifically for this one and not for these others?
The primary reason, and I think within the boot camp's primary reason is to show how controllers work within Laravel.
Okay.
What we could still do all of this within Livewire and Volt when we get there, but the primary reason is because we want to pass information into this view that we're going to set up in the chirp controller, and usually all of that data isn't necessarily passed in the route web.php itself. If we wanted to say, give me all of the chirps, you can pass that into the view itself within the web.php route. So if we wanted to say in our dashboard, I want all of the chirps to be available to that view, we could do that. But most of the time, you're going to be doing that in a controller instead of in the routes itself.
Okay. Cool. So index, and then I notice functions, a lot of them are starting on the next line. Is that required?
It's not required. That's
Okay.
more of like, I forget what it stands for, but PSR, which is the standard formattation stuff for PHP, usually has it in the next line.
Okay. Interesting. I don't love that.
Yeah, no one come from JavaScript really does. I
Yeah.
don't. I think my code automatically saves it and it pushes it to the next line. Actually, it might not. No, I never use it in the next line.
Okay.
We're going to return a view, and we're going to call that was a string of chirps. And then as a second parameter in this view function, we're going to have an array. And it's kind of what Copilot's doing is already correct. But this is where Eloquent comes in. So what we could do is, instead of auth user chirps, because we want to show all of the chirps in this array,
And
we're just going to say, what? Go for it.
Because that's not calling the function that we defined. Because then we define on the chirp model, we defined, or wait, no, where was that?
On the user model.
User model. So we define a function that does this. This isn't calling that function.
No, that is not calling that function for this particular. That would be calling the collection of chirps. But for this particular instance, where we're passing this information into the view, we really just want all of the chirps from the database, because what we're going to do is kind of like a Twitter, anybody who has ever chirped.
Why is this under the user though?
Like what Copilot did?
Yeah. Did Copilot do what you wanted me to do?
No. We'll erase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll erase this.
So right now, though, this is for this to work. Would it need to be that?
For this to work, you could either so basically, what with omitting the function would be, I want to grab all of those as a collection, and so a collection would be all of the chirps in the model. So that is technically correct, but you could also create it as a function and add additional parameters. These would be eloquent parameters. You could say that I want the latest, or I want to paginate them, or add additional queries to those chirps. But omitting those brackets at the end is just saying I want all of them to be passed in a loopable format as a collection.
So this is not calling this function?
That is calling that function.
This is calling that function.
As a method, yes.
Even though you don't actually use the curly brackets?
Yep.
Or the parentheses?
Yep, that is correct. Someone probably can correct me of what that's actually called, but
Okay. So if I were, so I should get an error if I were to delete that.
You probably wouldn't get an error. It probably wouldn't.
Someone Mubashar said if you left the code as is, yes, it would call the function on the user model. That's interesting. Calling the function gives you the eloquent. It's a magic function. It's a magic function chirps. Calling the function gives you the eloquent.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay. So
Gives you the eloquent.
Thank you, Stony.
Calling the
That
property
doesn't make
just
sense.
gives you
Yeah.
the data.
If you call it as a function, you have additional properties that you can, or additional methods that you can access, like what Copilot's doing to grab the latest or to order them in a certain way. So this is eloquent ORM right now that we're in for auth user. And then with omitting that function is basically just saying, you're still technically using that function in the model that we set up, but you're just grabbing them as a data of collection.
So if you call as a function, you can call eloquent ORM stuff. So somebody is saying what I have here is the same as calling this.
Mm-hmm.
So these two things are the same thing. This is
Yes.
just a shorthand.
Yes.
Okay. And this is a magic shorthand that they give. Okay. That's interesting. It doesn't quite I mean, this is all brand new for me and very different. Doesn't
Yeah.
quite so Stoney is saying Laravel is amazing. It doesn't quite resonate with me yet of that being amazing.
Is it
Of like
because you don't necessarily know where that's coming from?
well, it like the confusion of like calling like I have a class method here
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm not calling it. So that's confusing. Again, this is coming from like Stony, like lack of PHP and Laravel. So like syntactically, this is all new.
Yeah.
And then
No, that makes sense.
I don't see that as like the huge magic time saver in comparison to calling the function and calling get. But doesn't matter. Most important part is that I know this is related to the function that I defined here. And then it's a shorthand to actually execute the query and get back the data.
Yep. Shorthand to execute the query, get back the data in a
Yep.
in a
In a
format that we
collection.
need for the front end. Yep. Yep.
Cool. Okay.
But instead of this, we'll go ahead and say chirps is, so we'll remove all of the auth user piece for now. And we'll just say capital C for chirp.
Okay. So this is
So
going to
again,
come from the model or from the, yes, from the top level model class.
Mm-hmm.
And
we
then
can actually, it's going to be a single chirp. So chirp. It's not going to be chirps.
okay.
Because we're calling for the model itself. Perfect. And then what we can do is we can actually type chirp. One second. It should be like chirp all.
All capital or no. Or chirp like all after? Like
Yep.
that?
Perfect.
Chirp undefined type. Oh, this needs to. This is importing the actual model.
The model.
Here.
Yep. So this is what
Okay.
eloquent would be. As we're saying, I want to grab all of the chirps that are in the database and pass them into this chirps parameter, this chirps function.
Okay. Really quickly, Josh said it seems magical because JavaScript, there's no difference between a property and a method. Method is just a property with a function definition. But in PHP, you can have methods and properties with the same name. So Eloquent is utilizing magic methods to execute the method if you call a property that doesn't exist with the same name. Okay. I still have to wrap my head around that a little bit. So you can have a property and a method with the same name. Magic methods execute the method if you call a property that doesn't exist with the same name. Oh, by calling what? Okay. Don't quite get that. I'll get there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Josh is a lot better at explaining that piece because, like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I take for granted a lot in the
Right.
sense that that
Yeah. When you
that
actually like
magic method
stop
is
and try to make the
yeah,
translation in your head, it's
exactly,
tricky. Yeah.
exactly.
Leah on Twitch, what's going on? Welcome. Yes, trying out Laravel for the first time. Okay. So for this, we're saying return the view chirps. I don't know. Do we have that now?
We have not created
We
that
haven't created it.
yet.
And then we're going to pass in a property called chirps, which is going to be a collection of all the chirps.
Yep, yep. Um, so why don't we create that chirps now? So what we could do is create a new in our view file. We could create a new file called chirps.blade.php. So again, that's the
Chirps,
syntax
blade,
that it's expecting.
PHP.
And why don't let's actually
Let's see.
grab most of this dashboard. We can just copy and
Okay.
paste that in.
Dashboard. Let's do this. What was the
Um,
underscore syntax for this, by the way?
So the underscore syntax is actually the localization syntax. So anything underscore, if we were to set up localization in our app, that would
Hmm.
change to whatever language we wanted. So that underscore syntax is not necessary. It's not necessary, at least for us right now, but it shows that that's like the specific for localization.
Okay. Chirps. I'm giving my best guess here. Chirp body, but we called it message. Okay, so interesting. I'm curious about. I mean, we won't get to today, but like seeing how localization works. But
Mhm.
we have this would actually be an H1 on this page. We could just call it chirps. I don't know what all this styling is, so I may not need it, but um offload BG white. It may actually make sense to do that. Ooh, I'm not getting auto formatting. Tough.
I wonder if it's usually I would. So I wonder if because we didn't restart after maybe that package that
Maybe. Yeah.
so the only thing the for each the only thing different is going to be the dollar syntax. So we would need a dollar in front of
For chirps.
yep.
Okay. So dollar is
And as well as the
accessing.
second
Oh, really?
because we're instantiating a new variable.
Okay. And the like this one isn't creating a new variable, it's like referencing a variable? Because
Yep.
that like a template variable?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
So it's referencing the uh v- variable that we are passing into the page from that
Hmm.
controller.
Right. Okay. Um cool. Is that enough to go to slash chirps?
Looks like you have a up top. You changed the H1, or you changed it to a
Oh, just in one spot
yeah.
versus
There we
okay.
go.
Cool.
That should be enough. So if we were to go to slash chirps, there we go. We don't
Cute.
have any chirps in the
Yeah.
database just yet.
Okay.
So what we can do is, well, we can add it to the navigation if we wanted, but or we can just start creating a new chirp. So why don't we let's go ahead and create a new Livewire component and get into Livewire for a little bit.
Okay.
So if we go PHP artisan make :volt. So what we instantiated in that Laravel Breeze starter kit was Volt, which is basically Livewire but single file. So instead of having two files, which most of Livewire components, the traditional way is doing, hey, here's all my logic in one file, here's the view in another
Mm,
file.
okay.
Volt just pushes all of that into one file.
Okay.
And it's that functional API that we were initially said. And we'll go ahead and call this, why don't we call it chirps/create? That will create a new folder for us within Livewire.
Okay.
And then we should be good to go.
Is it gonna scaffold out form for us?
It won't
Probably
scaffold out the form
not.
for us,
Okay.
unfortunately. That'd be sweet though. Maybe
That
I'll
is that is one of the things Ruby on Rails does do is
for
I
the
forget
for the
what
crud.
is it can give you the CRUD stuff to start with.
That's
S-
that's a good point. I'll have
yeah.
to think about that.
Um
Um,
it's a good, like, obviously you end up changing stuff in there, but it's a good start. Stony, Amy did not steal the queue. It actually fell down there that you can't see it, but she did not come over and steal it. Stony's been encouraging my podcast co-host Amy to come over and steal the big queue that hung up behind my desk,
yeah.
but that didn't happen. All
Oh
right.
man. Sweet. Let's go ahead and let's start off with
So
why don't we in our
just,
div there, why don't we create a new form?
oh man, I'm not getting like any.
That is weird. Usually
I bet there's a
I do.
treat as configure. Rats. There's a way to like
To like
associate.
treat it as HTML.
Yeah, configure file association for PHP. Should just treat it like HTML. I feel like no, because then I'll lose. Like that might work for this. Yes, but then I lose all the PHP stuff up there.
And that might be just the highlighting. So it's not
Yeah,
as
something I'm
important.
missing, but well, oh, I just got it now. Interesting. Okay, so
Oh, that's weird.
message, input, text, name, chirp.
And one of the things we can actually do to show so all the components that were created with this starter kit are actually available for us as well. So if we wanted to, we could use the and we for the chirp, you would probably use like a text area, but we could do an X for the button, for example, we could do instead of button, we can say X dash primary dash button.
As the oh. So this is a component that it's already given to us?
Yep. So if we were to take a look in our views folder right there to the right, we have this components folder. Anything in that components folder is accessible by the X dash prefix.
Huh.
And then so we have things like text input and primary buttons that are basically just Alpine and Tailwind components.
Okay. So we have primary button. Oh, it has like tailwind merge of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Type submit. That syntax looks, I would definitely need to figure out. And it just takes in the slot. And then it's the blade PHP extension that fails. You do lose the blade syntax help now, though. Oh, because I marked this as PHP instead of blade.
Interesting.
Auto detect. So that would be blade, but that is failing. Well, I don't know. Oh, it says auto detect as HTML. But if I want to do blade, yeah, I don't know.
That's
Okay.
weird.
So they have components for us, which is cool. And then a wire click. So this is wire in terms of Livewire.
Yep. So this is Livewire function that GitHub Copilot kind of scaffolded out, where it's basically anything that we have as a function in the top half is basically a server side element. Livewire is, think of HTMX for Laravel in the sense that that create chirp function we could create up here in our PHP block so that clicking on this button or submitting the form would create this chirp. So what we'll do is, since we're using a functional syntax, what we'll do is use a $, and we can say like $ create chirp. Perfect. And then we can be, yep, that looks mostly correct. Yes.
Okay.
So this /app/model/chirp, we can actually solidify most of this. So what we can do is actually, let's gut that whole function instead.
Okay.
First, let's actually do some server-side validation. So use function Livewire volt state in what we're bringing into this form. Add a additional rules to that.
Like comma rules.
It's after state. Sorry, state rules.
So so we're bringing multiple things in from wherever
From
this
Livewire
is.
volts. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then now we can create a new rules function. So outside of this create chirp, we can create a new rules.
And am I doing this?
No $. So this would be just as a method that we're calling. So rules parentheses. And in this rules parentheses, we can create a new array. So it's not actually going to be a function. It's actually just going to be
Is
a
it
helper
like
method
this?
that we're passing in. So it's not actually going to be a function. It's going to be in the rules parentheses. We'll have an array.
Oh, okay. So passing rules in here.
Yep.
And then is rules a function?
It is not a function. It is a method. Yep. So there we go. And that should be good. Okay. So this is basically just saying here in this array.
We're calling. I thought we were defining a function. We're calling a function up here, and we're telling it what our validation should be. So this is kind of the equivalent of Zod.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So this is the equivalent of Zod, specific for Livewire Volt, but with the rules method syntax that we're calling. But Livewire or Laravel's validation is exactly similar to this. So anywhere in your Laravel app, you could validate in the same sense. You could say required, minimum of 3, maximum of 255, for example.
Okay.
And we could even say after required, we could put another line and say that this needs to be a string as well.
So just string like that.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I wonder if this is actual IntelliSense. These are real things.
Yep, those are real things.
Cool.
That's interesting.
So there's IntelliSense there. Yeah. Okay. So
Perfect.
then somehow we'll use that validation stuff inside of the create chirp.
Yep. And the first thing we'll need to do is create some state. So this would be similar to how we initiate like a state within and we actually don't need to call the chirp. So it's going to be similar in how we're using that function for rules. So it would just be the state of, and we'll say this is probably the message because that's what we're linking to within the text.
Yep.
And then this is where we'll use a arrow sign syntax. So that's and we actually can remove that message equals. So it would just be the state. So in the same sense that we're calling it as the rules.
Oh, this is a function up here. Okay. That we're calling. And do you call that individually for each property, or do you pass us an array of things that you want to keep in state?
You could pass it an array, or you can do it individually. So kind of both and. The array is probably better just in case if we ever were to add
another property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So why don't we put it into array, and we'll do the same syntax as kind of that rules of where we have the dollar or equal sign of
and then
yeah, perfect. And then we can that's just saying what do we want to set this state to? So from this component load, we would probably just want to set to a blank string.
Okay.
So
this is basically saying initial. This part is saying we're defining what our state is with an initial property of empty string, which should get passed down to here. I imagine there's some sort of wire value or something.
Yeah, very close. Yeah, wire model. So wire : model.
Okay.
So very
And
similar to
then,
view. The syntax is very similar to view in the sense of these colon syntax. Um,
and is wire model message to match that property that we defined?
Yep, correct,
Okay.
correct. So if we were, why don't we put this into, we'll put this component into our Livewire, into our blade view so we can see what that state's kind of initiating. So if we were to go into our chirps.blade.php,
Chirps, blade. This is the view.
how we
Oh,
would,
we created a component, but we haven't added it to our actual form yet.
yep, exactly.
Okay.
And how you would do that is using, so if we wanted to do this maybe above all
So
the chirps
above,
or
yeah.
below, wherever you want to do it, what we can do is this brackets. So, or not brackets, but the air, kind of like how you would for a HTML class. What's that's the less than sign? Yeah,
Angle brackets, yeah.
angle brackets. There we go. And then we could say Livewire. And that'll be actually underscore, all underscore.
Like from here?
All of
Or
Livewire will be underscore.
oh, you mean lowercase?
Lowercase, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Underscore.
Yeah, I was like, how do you make it all undercase or
All
like
underscore.
I was like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense.
And then what Copilot's doing is correct. So the colon is going to
Chirps,
be what's
Livewire,
in that
chirps,
Livewire folder that we have. It's looking for the
Livewire folder.
so views and then Livewire there.
Use
And then
Livewire, chirps, create.
dot create. So the dot syntax is going to be for folders.
Okay. And we created the chirps folder inside of Livewire.
We created it when we ran that make volt chirps / create command in our terminal.
Okay. And this is a component that doesn't. Okay, so we have components that they give us. Then we have like this basically is a component though, right?
Yep, it is a Livewire component. So I think that's the difference is the views folder components would be specifically for Blade. So that's kind of just
Blade
HTML rendered. There's no interactivity
okay.
in that.
Okay. So
There could be Alpine
Livewire
in that,
components. Okay. So we've added this inside of create blade. We have the input wired up with the model. And this model is just, well, it's just saying which property we're attached to from state, which is the message property.
Yep. So if we want to add something into that message array to when this component loads, we could say, hello or whatever, and that would be
as the
automatically
default value.
Yeah, it's a two-way data binding with that state.
And this code is all running on the server.
Yep.
And all then this is going to be the equivalent of what like actions are in Next.js now is a function that you just call as a function. What it's doing behind the scenes, is it just calling it through like an Ajax request?
Yep, exactly. So every within Livewire, and we haven't actually hooked it up to the form just yet. We have it hooked up to the button, but we can actually hook this up to the form too. So in form, you could have a wire : submit.
Submit, yeah.
And as well as equal to create chirp. And in that sense, the wire click is probably redundant.
Yeah.
But yes, that's exactly for the server action. So it sends an Ajax request when we submit the form or when we click the button to submit the form. And it will call that function on the server. And so Livewire does all of the magic kind of like handling behind the scenes of if we were, passing things to the view when we do that. If we were to like set state to a different value within that function, we could, it will kind of handle that. I'm sending information, but now I'm also receiving information as well.
Okay.
So for this function, why don't we validate it? So, and that looks, yep, let's do that. That's correct.
Okay. So this is referring to the class because inside of, or I guess we're not using class components, but like this is referring to the instance of the component because we call it state. And also, should this be chirp instead of message instead of chirp?
Yeah, that should
Yes.
be message. Yep,
Okay.
that's correct.
So we're saying here's our state, here's our validation. We call validate. We
Yeah.
then
And
will
why don't
that
we
throw an
actually
error?
yeah, it will throw an error if we don't have any validation. We can set up in our form a way to show that error as well. Uh,
Okay,
uh,
so it will return back some
and
sort of
not
state that
continue.
we can then reference inside of our UI.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay,
So why don't we set this validate to an actual variable? So we can say like dollar score, dollar sign validated equals
validated. Yep.
this validate. And then that way, with auth user chirps create, we can remove that message array and we can just pass in validated, because now we don't actually, because we have the same state as what our database accepts, we can use just the
Mm,
validated property. And
okay.
that'll be a dollar sign in front of that.
So defining and accessing variables is always dollar sign.
Yep. Defining and accessing variables is always dollar sign.
Okay. Tredco on Twitch. Welcome, welcome. Don't laugh at me for stumbling through PHP, or do. I don't care. It's fun either way.
Okay. And
So
now,
create validate. So this is just the validated data.
yes. Yep.
So okay. And
It's just
then
validating. It will completely stop the function if that validation does not pass. So it's not going to continue down that function.
okay, so you not have to do like any equivalent of try catch or anything specifically.
No.
It will do something to halt the function and it'll return some sort of state that we can access in the UI to show that message.
Yep. So
Validation
why don't we
message.
access
Okay.
that? We can do above like the primary button, because we have these components. This is a little bit easier, but what
Mm,
we could do is a
mm.
x dash input dash error, and we can take a look at this component of what it's doing. But it's going to
Uh,
accept a message parameter, or messages, I should say. Sorry. And that's going to be set with a colon first. Sorry, colon before messages. So this is saying that I want to push into this, or I want to create push specific data into this component.
okay.
And the message is going to be equals. And then with quotations, this is where we can have dollar sign errors, and then arrow syntax, get, and that's going to be a function. So get parameter, and then a single string of message. So this is the, if we were to take a look at this X input error component, what this is looking for is some kind of prop. And that's what that message is, um, so that
That's the
messages
okay.
is the prop that it's expecting. And basically it takes the error messages, and that's kind of like the syntax for Laravel, is these errors message, and that errors bag, if you will, that errors collection is specific to what the input is called. So because we have this input that is wire model of message, when we're trying to submit a form, it's going to give back any errors for that input of
Mhm.
message.
And this syntax that's right.
Yep, that's correct. Yep. So that
So
dollar, or the colon syntax is basically how to pass props into blade components.
okay. And then why do we not have that up here? Because this
Uh,
is not
that would be more like Livewire syntax of like, hey, here's what I want to connect to my state. So wire model, there's wire click, there's wire
okay. Okay,
offline.
so these are properties that Livewire accepts
Hmm.
that as
As
opposed
directives would
to
be.
things we're passing in, yeah, as custom directives as opposed to passing in data. So anytime we're in a blade component, we pass in with colon name thing. And this is tough. Like how much intelligence
Yep.
do you get around this type? Like is that always just a raw string?
Yeah, usually that's always a raw string within blade. Yeah, so there isn't much IntelliSense to go with that.
Okay.
That's good to note. But yeah, so even if we were to pass, if we wanted to pass in props to our Livewire component, even we could do that with the same colon syntax. So for example, if we want to pass all the chirps that we're passing into our chirps.blade.php view, we could pass them in and accept them in this Livewire component using that colon syntax.
Okay.
So now we should be hooked up, and we could try out creating a new chirp.
Okay. So we've added a component. This would be, is this an error?
Yeah, it looks
State
like
message.
if you go back to the
State. We did import that. Where is this? And create. Yeah.
Yes.
Tredgeco. Let me know how to pronounce that. But said you saw a video on Socket.io that helps me a lot on project. Big thanks for everything you do. That's awesome to hear. That must have been an older one. I think maybe the quiz.
We're
Or no,
missing
what
a
was
semicolon
chat maybe?
after rules.
Oh, okay. That would be something. It's funny because I prefer to have semicolons, but I have them auto completed with prettier for me in JavaScript, so I never do them myself.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, there is a label there, but
Dark mode.
someone said miss semicolon. Thank you. Keeping an open mind is so good. Yes. The colon in front of attribute marks it as a dynamic attribute. You can use PHP to dynamically generate a value without the. Oh, that makes sense. Without the colon, you have to stick with only strings. Okay, cool. So my
See, I'm learning
really
something too.
cool thing. Yeah, I know, right? Create chirp. Now,
Perfect. Now,
if this, okay, so we don't yet have a kind of a revalidate on the page that we're on. And then if I click chirp like this, then we get the error message. If I click just one, it should say should be at least 3 characters. Okay. So it doesn't look great, but this is the thing where I spent a lot of times over the past couple of days kind of working with form validation in Next.js. And we'll create some content on that. And there's a bunch of different ways to do stuff, and some of them get really gross. Now, I am really curious. I don't know if this is a thing or not, but I'm going to test it out. Is progressive enhancement for this?
it's probably not going to work.
Chirp, refresh. No, I don't know
Because
if
it
I
does
would've gotten-
use JavaScript behind the scenes.
Aha. So, okay. And this is one of the interesting things with server actions in Next.js. They do have some things in there for handling progressive enhancement, but this is dependent upon. So, Livewire is the JavaScript that gets.
Livewire is dependent on Alpine.js, which is kind of obfuscated for us because of Livewire. So we could do all this server rendered with just Blade, and we could have that form in our Blade component, or do that. And I know
that would
people,
be just traditional form submissions where we would have to have a handler for the form submission, grab the form data, do the things. Here we have this nice syntax where we get to call an action, which is just a function, but it's doing an HTTP request behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And if I refresh this, I was trying to see if there's an actual JavaScript file loaded. Would I not see that? Oh, I'm searching for random. That's why. So a couple things in here. I don't know which is which, but one of these in here is going to be the Livewire JavaScript that actually translates the definition of here's the function we're calling to an HTTP request that we do. Okay.
Yeah. And we would see that in a network request as well. We would see the like the Ajax whenever we submit the function as well.
Yeah. So we'll see an Ajax request and this one to /update. And this is going to kind of a catch-all route for Livewire, which must include some sort of indicator of what we're calling calls. Yep. So it knows which function it should be calling. It has, not sure what updates this specifically, but it's somewhere in here. One of these two is going to be the actual data. And then the response is this thing as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Clarkio said, "You best not be leaving us JavaScript devs." I doubt that's the case, but I have been really curious to learn more about this. So, okay, so there's the next thing. I
right.
am, just because I'm going to be hungry, I'm going to call it in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I would love to do this again if you are interested in doing like a part 2.
Oh yeah, completely interested.
Okay. What would be like in the next 10 minutes? What would you say would be a good next thing to try out?
Next thing to try out. Let's go ahead and, well, first off, we can just automatically let's get the redirect going, so that way when we click a chirp, we'll automatically redirect the page. What we can do is, that's going to be pretty simple. What we can just say is, in our create.blade.php, there's a couple different ways to do
Or
this.
you're saying redirect after we create it?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Create blade PHP. So inside of this would be some sort of redirect.
Yep. And that would be exactly what that is, like that redirect. That's going to be the named route that we had. So that redirect function to that 2 would be the actual slash function, but we could also do redirect route for a name function.
And then this would just be the name without the slash.
Yep.
So correct. What you're doing here is just refreshing this page.
Yep. So that would be refreshing the page. There's a bunch of different ways to do this within Livewire, where we don't have to refresh the page. That what Copilot was initially showing was the emit. And what Livewire does is basically say, okay, when this function runs, we could send to the parent component or to children component, whatever, where we want to, we can send this, this listener of saying, we want to say, hey, this chirp was created. And then in another Livewire component, in our blade, for example, what we could do is say, now that's created, let me refresh these chirps. So that would be no page reload at all.
Okay. So let's just see this. So this would do a full page refresh. So refresh my page, chirp, refresh, cool. And then if we wanted, so what's the syntax for emit? So just call emit.
Yep. So it would be called emit, and yep. And then it would be whatever we want to.
Yep.
Yep.
And then we would consume this event.
And it would probably be, instead of emit, the best way to do it actually would probably be, it would be $this dispatch. And then so arrow syntax dispatch instead of emit. Yeah.
Okay. Dispatch.
And now what we would do is, we kind of did this a little backwards within chirps.blade.php, but within chirps.blade.php, we would take out all of this for each loop, and we could refactor this into its own Livewire component.
Okay.
So if we were to copy that, let's see how fast we can do it. Copy that, and then in our terminal, we could write PHP artisan make volt, and we can say chirps/list.
Okay, so this is in the directory under Livewire /chirps/list, and it's going to create list.blade.php.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Okay. And so there in this div, we could have that for each. So now what we could do is, back in our chirps.blade.php, we could initiate this component. So that's the,
is this with,
yep, Livewire : and then chirps dot list. Then it'll be a self-closing bracket.
Okay. And then this
or
self-closing tag like that.
Self-closing tag. Yes. Sorry.
Okay. No, you said it right. I wouldn't paying attention to you.
And then in the chirps.blade.php, we do have to pass in the chirps to this.
Okay, so passing in is $, and that's going to come from.
Yeah, we could pass in equals, or not equals, quotation $chirps, because since we're passing it into this blade already, we could pass it in there.
Oh, it's passed into this view because, okay, so we define the route, we define what data goes to this route or to this view, and then we already have that, so we can pass that into this thing by just passing it on through.
Yep.
Okay.
And there would be a bunch of different ways that we could do that instead. Actually, let's go ahead and remove it just for time's sake. What we can do is, instead of passing in like we're passing in from the controller, in our list Livewire component, why don't we set the state to so we have that state function, and let's set chirps. And what we can do is call eloquent right here. So instead of we'll do an inline function, so equals fn, and this is going to be like a shorthand syntax for PHP. So and then it's going to be yes that, but instead of auth user, we'll do capital
Chirp
C
model.
for chirp. Yep, and yeah,
Just do
latest
get.
it would be chirp all.
Oh,
Instead
okay.
of get. Yep.
So get was with the specific filter or
Yep. And then we
the
do.
order.
Yep. And then we do have to bring in the model, the chirp model. So that'd be above this. We could say, I don't think it's going to use IntelliFence, so we could say use.
Oh, it didn't use.
It would be app.
That.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
This is saying, so we're going to have a piece of state, which is chirps. We're going to reference that down here. We're not passing it into this component. So now we have, this is for time, but we have a kind of a wasted thing being passed into the view. And then we're just consuming this here. And then somewhere in here is a consume this event. And when this event happens, refresh the chirps.
Yep. So we could say, additionally to this state, so when we use function livewire volt state, we could use bring in another function called on. So
where would that go?
The use at the very top, use function livewire volt
in state. Okay.
Yeah. So we could bring on, and now we can have a new on function where we can say
chirp created.
Yep. Basically that. I think that should be correct if I'm
something
remembering what we called it before.
So there's, we omitted the event of chirp created. We also wouldn't need, we do need, we'll keep that. So we'll dispatch the event. We consume the event. It then calls a function, inline function, where it sets state chirps to chirp all.
So yeah, and the state is probably best to create a new function that we then run
reuse
instead of doing that. Yeah. So if we were to do like a get chirps function, and that's going to be the $ gets chirps instead of that function syntax. Yep. Equals function
return chirp all, and then this would be
instead of return chirps all, we can say this chirps, and then we can run that chirp all. So this chirps equals chirp all. So $ this instead of return. Yeah.
This.
Actually, we do need to return.
Okay, so leave it the way it was.
Yeah. Well, what we could do is.
Well, you could.
Yeah, we could do
well,
an
you
inline.
Could do. Were you saying to do this chirps?
Yep.
Like that?
Yeah, because we need to set the state to grab all the chirps.
And then this would call.
And then the chirp created instead of in the on chirp created, that's where we would call the get chirps function. We can just call it we can actually just call, we shouldn't have to call this. So it should be just get chirps. So the $ get chirps.
Not in. parentheses.
Yep. So just like that. Yep.
Okay. If we had this return the chirps instead of setting it to the state, we could have used that up here as well. Like we could have
Yes.
defined a function that's that assigns. Well, anyway, okay. All right, does that look good?
I think so. We're speed running it, but I think it looks good.
Matthias said, this version of Next.js looks weird. Shouldn't you use PHP at the top? Launch, get chirps.
What do
we have to define that? Does it matter when it's defined?
It's because it needs to be a dollar an arrow syntax. So instead of the comma, it's going to be
comma.
Instead of the comma after chirp created, it's going to be equals, like the dollar sign equals. So equals bracket or greater than sign.
I'm confused.
Sorry. The dollar
arrow.
Yeah, arrow syntax. There we go.
Oh, it's one thing, and this is obviously being outside of the ecosystem. It seems like there's a bunch of different small syntaxes.
Yeah, different small syntaxes within PHP of the difference between you have the single arrow, and then you have this.
Is this defining
setter arrow?
Is this defining a function?
Yes. So it's saying when you have this dispatched event within Livewire, when that chirp created gets run,
this function.
We're going to call that function, and we can actually put all of this in an array as well, because I think that will yell at us if we don't have that.
Which one? Array. This whole thing?
Yes.
The whole thing like that?
Yep. There we go.
So it's listening for. Okay. Please refresh my data, but not the page. Boom. Okay.
Boom.
Cool. So eventing is something I liked in Angular. Like having eventing built into a framework or anything is actually really, really helpful.
Yep. And this is just our Livewire events. The cool thing within Laravel is you have even more bigger events that you want to do. Say like when a new chirp is posted, if we wanted to send a notification and like send an email to whoever's logged in at the time, or maybe send an email to all of our users, that's what Laravel events can do. So those dispatched events are more like, hey, we want these components in the front end to talk to each other. The Laravel events are going to be more of like, okay, now in a long running queue, I want to send 1,000 emails to every user kind of thing.
Cool.
So all of that is built out of the box as well.
Josh said, look at that real-time update without adding 6 gigabits of JavaScript. I'd be really
well, you just can't turn off
JavaScript. Yeah. I'd be really curious to compare size of JavaScript for something minimal for this.
Yeah. I'd be curious to your point of like, okay, you can't turn off JavaScript. I am curious of like one thing that I'm interested, especially with how, even frameworks like Next.js help push things forward for everything else. I'm curious if there's going to be something within Livewire, maybe from the community or even the creator, Caleb Borzio, where we would have this ability to default to server rendered forms or whatever. So you don't have to kind of build it twice. There are some people who have the ability of, okay, I'm showing this Livewire component, but if JavaScript is disabled, I just show the blade component. But it'd be interesting to see if that was built out of the box. That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Same thing with like optimistic UI. With JavaScript enhanced, there is like that server load with any server, there's that minimization. Livewire has this loading attribute to say, okay, when we're calling this chirp created function, while that chirp created function is being run and we're waiting for something to be returned from the server,
have state on the front end to know.
Yeah. You can show whatever you want within that wire loading directive.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. It's kind of exactly what I expected. Syntax is tough.
Yeah.
A lot of things built in, and a lot of things that are built in that just don't get covered in a lot of, like if you watch a Next.js getting started tutorial, it often is not going to cover a lot of the things that are built in here. And I think I don't know. It seems to fit like with what I expected, which is good.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. That makes sense. Just curious from my own perspective, because I think a lot of what I am, interested and passionate about is like people who are in the JavaScript community, but they don't want to put a bunch of whole packages all together. What about the syntax is the most like just hard to wrap around? Is it the difference between like, okay, there's so many ways to do different things. So in JavaScript, most of the time you have, dot syntax,
mhm.
that's out of the gate, how to set variables because it's var equals. What was the most confusing?
um ch- trying to think. I mean, I guess these are two examples, like bracket here, class property or method, or like static
Mm,
property here. The other thing I think that's really tough is not having. It would be better for me if I had a better setup for IntelliSense, because once you start
mhm.
passing in like strings that are function executions,
Yep.
that's gross no matter what you're in. So
Yep.
having IntelliSense with that is huge, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, but I think I did okay.
Yeah. No, you
And
did
it
a great
already
job.
got better within like 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. You
So,
were
yeah.
you're flying through. So I think one of the things that's is interesting to me, especially like as you dive into this, is like you have this understanding of it works how you would expect in that sense. So I think that was really
Mhm.
interesting for me to see personally, because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you knew that we're passing all this in, so we should be able to have this accessible to us there. It's nothing so vastly different in terms of structure of code that's not like, okay, why
Yeah.
doesn't this work the way it should, kind of thing.
Yep. Also, the semicolons bit me a couple times. So,
Yep.
yeah, the IntelliSense and then editor support, making sure like that I get full IntelliSense and
Yep.
stuff for Blade files, which look like I think it may be, I don't know why it wasn't working at first, but it looks like it is
Yeah.
now.
Interesting. And
No, my HTML stuff is not working,
oh, okay.
and Emmet is not working. Okay, so yeah.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
it does some of the stuff in there, but not to actually give me like tags and stuff. And
That's
uh,
helpful to know. And
yeah.
it'd be I think that probably is also like a good bonus or like a good plus or a point for working with inertia. Like because that way, okay, you already have your tooling set up for React and
Oh
JSX
yeah.
or
Use
Vue or
that.
anything like that. Then it's just the part I always like to say when people are thinking like, okay, Livewire versus React, I always like to think of it. Livewire is like the HTMX where you have all of that server rendered like ready on your page, just like we
Mhm.
called the state of we're calling this query like a server component. Within Inertia, it's less of like the server component action. It's more like in our controller, we're passing all this to the view and we can do whatever we want in the view there. So different
Yep.
like mental model, I guess, with an inertia.
Yep. That makes sense, especially for people coming from JavaScript
Yeah,
ecosystem.
yeah. And
Um,
the part that is interesting about inertia to me is that so like within React, we would have to create a new route. If we want to make a new chirp created route, we would have to make a chirp/create route so that we can do something in that controller to say, okay, I want to save this to the page. You can't necessarily save it because in React, you can't, at least within Laravel now. I'd be curious of what the inertia team is putting together, but there's no server components to call those database queries, for example.
yep. Okay. Cool. Lots to Sony said come stream more Laravel love on Twitch, Josh. Yep. Yeah, I'll definitely connect with you about doing a part two,
That'd
because
be fun.
I want to get even deeper.
Yeah, it'd be cool if we ever did. I know just brainstorm, but it'd be cool if we did like, hey, let's both build an app in
Hmm.
your preferred framework and mine. Then we can.
Oh yeah.
I'd love to learn like how you made certain choices, stuff like that. So like that's
Oh,
always
that'd be
interesting to
really
me.
cool. That would be an awesome, and like a video series too. That'd be a really good idea. Choose something simple. Hopefully have it like overlap with something else. Like I'm doing a tiny hackathon project right now.
Oh, nice.
And I also was thinking about doing tutorials that are like build this in Next, build this in Astro, one
Oh,
versus
there
the
you go.
other. But I think
Yeah.
that'd be an awesome idea.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Like, for example, it'd be cool to see because I haven't gotten to work with ingest, for example, that much. I know what it does, but it'd be interesting
Yeah.
to see, like, okay, how does things happen in ingest
Yep.
versus like queues in Laravel, for example.
Yep. Yep.
That'd be sweet.
Cool.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot
Yeah,
of
man.
fun.
Great to connect. This is the first time, everybody, that we've actually gotten to like see each other and talk on video. So that's been a ton of fun.
Yep.
If you're on Twitch, I'm gonna raid you over to Jason Langsdorf's channel, so you can go hang out with Jason. And if you're on YouTube, thanks for watching. It'll be on Twitch for a little while, but it'll stay on YouTube, so you can go back and watch this anytime later on as well. But I'm gonna take us out, put the thanks for watching screen on, rate everyone over to Twitch, then we'll call it. But thanks again, Josh, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Yeah.